And this takes me back to another video that I watched of his, Bad Science, Bad Theology. This video that he does commits the genetic fallacy. Basically, he's trying to unravel all of everything by saying that it's just how people try to make sense of things. Even if that's true, even if we grant it, it could still be true. That is to say, even if they did come up with the idea of God in the past, and then over time we refined it to what we have now, even if that's true, God could still exist.
Thank you for watching my video, Bad Science, Bad Theology. It's one of the videos of which I'm most proud. Let me explain to you why it does not commit the genetic fallacy. And there are two reasons for that. The second reason that I will give you is the more compelling of the two. The first reason, just to get that out of the way, is that the genetic fallacy only applies if the argument is purely based on the origins of something. When we're dealing with God and religion, when I point out the origins of religion and I give that as a reason why we shouldn't be taking it seriously, I'm doing that in a larger context. When I'm illustrating the fact that the initial genetic reasons, the original reasons for adopting a religion in the first place were inadequate, and furthermore, no more adequate reasons have emerged since then. I'm pointing out that there's more to it than just saying an example of the genetic fallacy would be for me to say, I have a better example than the one I originally used in this video, and I'm just going to replace that one with this one before I post this. If an atheist actually were to argue that religion and God originated with primitive people who didn't understand the world, and therefore God doesn't exist, which is what you're implying is the argument, then that would be the genetic fallacy. What I should have pointed out, and what I will point out now, is that is not the conclusion of the argument that atheists use when they use that line of reasoning. The actual conclusion that we're making is merely that there are not adequate reasons to justify persisting belief in God. It doesn't comment on the actual existence of God. It comments on the justification of your belief, which is directly tied to the genesis of religion. It is a very distinct causal relationship. So you're correct that the genetic fallacy cannot disprove the existence of God, of course. But it's not a fallacy when the aims are not so ambitious. The second and more compelling reason why the genetic fallacy does not apply to my video, Bad Science, Bad Theology, is because the point of that video has nothing to do with disproving the existence of God. The purpose of that video is to point out the intellectual error in people using things like abiogenesis or the Higgs boson, specifically as arguments for God. And that's why the video is called Bad Science, Bad Theology, because I'm pointing out that God of the Gaps, which is basically what it's about, is bad science and it's bad theology. It's not, you're not doing either side justice with those arguments. It has nothing to do with the overall existence of God. It is purely about the God of the Gaps arguments. Now, it is possible to believe, in fact, the Bad Science, Bad Theology video was actually conceived by me while I was Catholic, okay? So, if that helps you to realize that it was not an argument against the existence of God at all. Now, it fits into a larger tapestry that pertains to the debate about the existence of God, but itself was not an argument about that topic.
He affirms that science is the best way to know what is true.
Yeah, name me one better. Any one.
Now, I would say Frank J. Tripler would be something more close to what the Rational Roundtable was saying, that God has a physical aspect to him, or is physical. And Frank J. Tripler seems to agree. But I would ask the Rational Roundtable, as well as Frank, why think that God must be limited to physical things? Why couldn't God use some other method that we have no idea about to initiate the universe? Why would God constrain himself to the laws of a universe that does not yet exist?
You do apparently seem to have seen Rational Roundtable's response, but you needed to have watched my response to his response. What I will say is why it's important that God be physical, and you seem to confuse physical with being limited specifically to the rules and laws of our universe. That's not the case. Physical means involving physical laws. Now, if we were to hypothetically, this is a hypothetical here, which is why I said hypothetically, so try not to get lost in that, open a portal to a parallel universe, and inside that maybe that parallel universe was like the world that is the setting for the Ragged Astronauts. If you've never read that novel, I recommend it. It's a good story. Where the laws of physics operate differently, very differently from ours. Those laws of physics would be different from our physics, but they would still be physics because they would still be physical. It's a different physics, but it's physics. I'm sure Rational Roundtable would agree with me that God is not, the hypothetical God that we're debating about, he and I, is not limited to our physics, but has to be physical, because to not be physical is to not be anything. It's part of what it means to be physical. Maybe that seems like we're arguing semantics to you, but I think you really need to read a little bit more about the topic.
Why isn't spiritual or spirit allowed as a talking point in this discussion?
Because it doesn't mean anything. The words have no meaning. They have no ontology. Spirit and spiritual simply mean not physical. They are a negation. They are not an affirmation. They have no positive ontology of their own.
And I just don't know why people are constraining themselves and telling themselves that science is the best way to determine what is true. Without philosophy, science couldn't stand up at all.
Now that is the genetic fallacy. Thank you. That would have been a great example when I was talking about that earlier in the video. So thank you, Infinite Hope. That's a great example of the genetic fallacy. Just because science came from, in some sense, another larger discipline means that it's not trustworthy. That is textbook genetic fallacy. I couldn't have done. I failed. I tried to do better. I tried to come up with something, and I had to make something up. That's perfect. Thank you.
What part of you is you? If I took out your brain from your body and I kept both of them alive, which one would be you? I'm going to assume you're going to say your brain. So now I'm going to ask, if I start slicing up your brain, are those slices you? Which part is you? Where do you exist inside of that physical construct? At what point do I slice away you? I look forward to your response. Until next time, peace out.
Actually, a pretty interesting question, and I have what I hope you will find to be an interesting answer to that. I personally am of the belief that self is an emergent phenomenon, and in a sense, kind of an illusion. That sounds a little Buddhist, but and I'm not really trying to get Eastern on you, but it's an emergent phenomenon. So, when you talk about separating the brain and the body, which one do I consider me? And if you kept them both alive, well, yeah, you're pretty much right that I would choose the brain. I'd feel comfortable with that. Slicing the brain up, at what point would that become me? Well, like the self is an emergent property. It emerges from a complex interaction between different things, many different things. The self, in order to exist and have meaning, depends upon that interaction. So the self is not, and please listen very carefully to what I say, because it would be very easy to misconstrue what I'm saying, and I want very much for it not to be misconstrued. I'm not proposing a metaphysical soul, but in a sense, in an identity sense, the self is separate from, conceptually separate from the actual physical composition of the brain. I'm not talking about a soul. I'm not saying that there's a self that exists separately from the brain. I'm saying there's a self that is conceptually distinct from the brain. And once you slice up the brain, you're disrupting the interaction that perpetuates the self. You are destroying the phenomena from which self emerges. So there is not one particular part of the brain that is the self. And I think if you look at some of the research that's been done with patients that have had to have their corpus callosum, that's what it's called, severed, then the left and the right brain are isolated from each other, then that I think would really be very interesting for you to look at, to examine this idea of self and the brain. Corpus callosum research is probably the most eye-opening thing I can think of to point you toward, and I'll find a good article about that, and I'll link it right here. No, there. Yeah, right there. Enjoy.